Welcome to Inside Boxing Weekly live on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. Inside Boxing Weekly is brought to you by the Retired Boxers Foundation and, of course, MyBookie.ag. To get to MyBookie.ag, go to thegruelingtruth.net, click on the banner. It'll take you right there. You can bet all the NFL games tomorrow, or you could bet on boxing next weekend if there's any left, but we know boxing pretty much takes a break now. I'm your host, Mike Goodpaster. And right now, I want to welcome in my co-host. First up, Jeremiah Preisser.
Good evening, everyone. Again, I want to, like every week, I want to thank all of our listeners for tuning in week and week out. Let's talk some boxing, fellas.
And, of course, last but not least, John Einreinhofer.
Good to be here, Mike. And just to add to what you said, true. Boxing, it's always been unofficial, but it always takes a break around this time of year, so this is kind of it for the results of 2017.
Yeah, but we'll still be doing shows, John. So we're going to do a top 10 pound-for-pound show in the next couple weeks. We'll also do the year-end awards that we did last year. I guess it'd be the second annual now, Jeremiah. And also our Legends of Boxing show. We're going to keep it going. We've had guys like George Foreman, Mike Weaver, Pinklin Thomas on in the last week. Starting tomorrow, the next week, so far, the schedule is tentative, but the people I'm going to tell you about are sure. Is tomorrow night at 6 o'clock Eastern, we will have Juan Laporte on. Monday at noon, we will have James Lights Out Tony. Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern, we'll have former heavyweight contender Ron Stander on the show. And then Thursday night, we'll have James Buddy McGirt. So we will also probably add to that over the next day or two. So go to thegruelingtruth.net to keep up with that. All right, guys. Tonight, Billy Joe Saunders, David Lemieux. A lot of people thought this was an even fight. It was far from an even fight. Billy Joe Saunders tonight, I think, finally completely lived up to his potential and showed what he is capable of being. And he completely embarrassed David Lemieux, Jeremiah.
Yes, he did. I mean, I'd liked Billy Joe Saunders coming up. I mean, Billy Joe, if you watch him early in his career, I mean, he had a good amateur pedigree. I mean, I don't think he had a ton of fights. I think it was about 40, 50, 60. I can't remember exactly, but it wasn't a long amateur career, but he was able to do well in the amateur ranks. And so you watch him coming up through the ranks. He ends up fighting a good number of quality amateurs. I mean, he fights Jared Fletcher, who I believe was an Australian Olympian. He fights John Ryder, who was, a good British prospect as well. Then he fights Gary O'Sullivan, who we saw tonight, beat Antoine Douglas. And then he fights Chris Eubank Jr., and he takes all of their zeros. And he looks good in the process doing it. And so, watching that, I had high hopes for the guy. I mean, because I had, he's got good size. I mean, he's like 5'11". He's a southpaw. He's slick when he wants to be. He's got a good jab. And his power is not that bad. I mean, he's a guy who can hurt you if he lands cleanly. He's not a guy who's going to put you away with one shot. But I had high hopes for the guy. And then he struggles a bit and kind of, it felt like he was flatlining there for a while. So, I had some concern. I think a lot of us had some concerns. And then he fights David Lemieux, and he looks – this is the best Billy Joe Saunders I've ever seen. This is the guy I'd always hoped to see. He exposed David Lemieux in every fault that he had. I mean, he kept turning him. He would make a miss. I mean, Lemieux landed very, very few clean power punches. I mean, of course, that's not a guy you want landing cleanly, but Lemieux landed virtually under 5. It had to be under 5 clean power shots, and none which were real good punches. His jab looked fantastic. I was really impressed with his timing because Lemieux is pretty one-dimensional in his approach. He'll jab you a couple times, and then he'll try to bang on the right hand, and if that doesn't land, he'll shift, and then he'll try to land hooks or whatever. It's just predictable. When a guy like Billy Joe Saunders, who has a good boxing brain, it just wasn't enough. But I was really impressed with his timing because Lemieux would throw out a jab, throw out 2 jabs, and Saunders would time it really well, counter with his own jab. He'd pop him with the left hand from time to time. I was impressed. I mean, this Billy Joe Saunders looks like he'd be a pretty tough outing for most of the top 160 pounders in the world.
All right, John, your take on the fight tonight?
Yes, Saunders dominated the fight. He looked good. I think that clearly, let's say, if Canelo Alvarez is the lineal champ, and then clearly Gennady Golovkin is the number one contender, this makes Saunders clearly the number 2 guy after Golovkin. I'd have to give him credit for that. But as good as he looked and as bad, look, David Lemieux, I always suspected was limited. I think we saw that tonight. Remember, he's already lost to Alcine. I have to play just a slight devil's advocate. He's already lost to Alcine. He got stopped by Rubio. Our inflated opinion, and all of us, including myself, our inflated opinion of Lemieux is basically coming from 3 fights. He stopped Gabe Rosado. He beat Endam on a decision where he dropped him quite a few times. And then he had the knockout over Curtis Stevens. So based on those 3 fights now, with a little bit of hindsight, how good was Lemieux? He got dominated by Golovkin. He wasn't competitive, and he wasn't competitive against Saunders. So that tells us a little something. Saunders has got a type of style that's going to be difficult for anybody. I do agree that I think he punches harder than his record would indicate, his KO percentage. I think they misinterpreted, though, what his corner was telling him, Engel, and it fits with his style. He was saying, just bust him up. Don't get close to him. Don't try to stop him. There was rounds there later in the fight where it was clear, really, and I will give Saunders this. I mean, he could have stopped Lemieux, and he chose not to open up and do it. So he's hyper cautious, and that doesn't add to entertainment. He's not going to get knockouts he could be getting, but he's got wins over Lee, Lemieux, Eubank Jr. now. But remember, Eubank Jr. was a split decision. Andy Lee was a majority decision. Could have gone either way. It came down to he did drop Lee twice in 1 round and deserves credit for that, but the fight certainly could have gone either way. It was not a dominant performance by Saunders in that fight. And then, he had trouble he shouldn't have with Avakov and Monroe. So I want to give him credit for the performance. He dominated. I gave Lemieux 1 round, and that one could have gone either way. So I don't have any problem with anybody that had scored a shutout for Saunders. He's fast. I think he hits harder than his KO percentage would indicate. I think he could get more stoppages if he chose to. He's good defensively. I was impressed with his conditioning. Normally a guy that moves that much is going to get tired, and he really didn't get tired. But that's where I have some criticisms of Lemieux, because one thing I think that you can do when you're in with a boxer like that, who's obviously more skilled, but no matter how good he is, if you start making a boxer have to move for all 12 rounds and keep moving and keep backing off, anybody who boxes like that is going to get tired if you put enough pressure on him, if you really come after him. And the one thing I had always liked about David Lemieux throughout his career is any fight he was in, he was always David Lemieux. In other words, he came at you and just kept throwing those punches and opening up and didn't really care if he was exposed to getting knocked out. I didn't see that David Lemieux tonight. Now, part of that, of course, is because he's in with Saunders and he's afraid of getting countered with that underrated left hand that Saunders does have, and I understand that. He's the one in the ring with him, and he got busted up as it was. But I didn't see that go for broke David Lemieux tonight, and where that David Lemieux would have at least been more effective, even if maybe he would have then gotten stopped eventually, he would have put some pressure on Saunders where Saunders might have tired, and maybe in the second half of the fight he would have had a chance to get something done. But he wasn't putting in that kind of pressure. This was a David Lemieux. The attempts he was making, he was trying to work in behind a jab, and that just wasn't going to work with Saunders. He had to put more pressure on and open up and go for broke a little more, and he didn't do that, and he got busted up badly anyway. So obviously a good night for Saunders. His stock goes up, Lemieux's goes down. I don't think we'll see Lemieux as a serious factor, even though he's only 28 years old. This is now times we've seen his limitations exposed, and unless I don't know. I just don't think really. I don't think against any real top 10 guy he's going to be a factor, frankly. So I think probably this will be the last we'll see of him on the elite level.
All right, so where does Billy Joe Saunders go from here, John?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think, if he were to get in, like, just in theory, I don't know if this fight would happen, but, if he matches up against Canelo Alvarez, it might look a lot like the Lara fight, really. And, what Canelo does do that Lemieux didn't do here is that Canelo comes at you just enough when he's in with a guy like that and works the body that the guy will hesitate about opening up and won't let his hands go as much because he's afraid of getting hit with the power shot. He's being threatened by it more. Lemieux just wasn't getting close enough and putting enough pressure on to really make Saunders particularly worry about that. But that fight might not necessarily happen. I think what I was curious about, I have no evidence of this, but the way the HBO commentators were talking about him, and since he was on HBO, I was wondering if maybe HBO is talking with Frank Warren about using Saunders. And the reason I guess that is because HBO is scooping up the top middleweights lately, potential top middleweights. Obviously, they want to control the middleweight division. They don't have Jamal Charlo, but who's with PBC and Al Heyman, but they've got about everybody else now. And the way they talked about Saunders tonight, I wonder if he's going to be part of that plan. So why that isn't of interest to me, because then since they have guys like Andrade now who need somebody to fight, maybe that would be something more interesting that we could get. I was thinking, a guy like Gary Vyanchenko, who's much more skilled than Lemieux and has much more amateur pedigree, could probably put pressure on a Saunders and make a much more interesting fight. That's one that also crossed my mind. Golovkin getting older, if he beats Canelo in the rematch, Saunders does have a style that probably could give him some trouble at this stage. Again,
I think his trouble gives him more Canelo trouble because Canelo's, proven that he has a hard time dealing with a slick boxer.
Yeah, I think that both guys would potentially have trouble with Saunders' style. He's a southpaw, he's fast, and he boxes. He's a guy that's going to give you some trouble. So I think either of them could have trouble with him if it would happen. And even though I don't care for this part of it, maybe the alphabet belt gets him one of those fights that it wouldn't otherwise. But then again, in fairness to Saunders, as I just stated, I would have him right behind Canelo and Golovkin at that point. So he would be the fighter that's deserving of that shot as well, even if he didn't have the WBO belt. So in fairness to him, he does deserve a fight at that level at this point. And it's just going to be a question of whether he gets it. And then if he does get it, will it be enough of a style mesh where the fight has some entertainment value? Because let's face it, we do also want to be entertained.
Well, you weren't entertained tonight?
I did not find tonight's fight overly entertaining. I thought Saunders fought well, but it was basically it ended up, it was an even money fight going in, so nobody could be blamed for that because the odds makers had it even, but it played out as a mismatch.
Yeah. And to me, I don't know why Daniel Jacobs wouldn't make your top part of that list.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I actually forgot about Jacobs, Mike. I'm sorry.
Because actually, I think out of Jacobs, Canelo, and Golovkin, I think Jacobs would be a much tougher fight than the other two for Saunders from what I saw tonight.
Yeah, and let me correct myself. I don't think just because of tonight that Saunders jumps past Jacobs. I would still keep Jacobs ahead of him. Even though I'm not saying Saunders isn't capable of beating Jacobs. That would be a good fight, and Jacobs, I think, is capable of beating Saunders. But I think Jacobs has still done enough to be ranked ahead of him, but I'd put Saunders right in there right after Jacobs then. I think Saunders probably did enough here that I would jump him over Jamal Charlo, even though I like Jamal Charlo a lot. Not that he's done anything wrong, just because of the comparative achievements of the two. So I would do that, but I'd still keep Jacobs up there right behind Canelo and Golovkin.
All right, Jeremiah, what's your opinion on Saunders and where he ranks right now in the middleweight division?
I think John's assessment is spot on. I mean, you got to have Alvarez and Golovkin 1 and 2, and I think Jacobs at 3, and then Saunders at 4. I think that's perfectly. I think that's a perfect placement. I mean, Saunders, you got to give him credit. I mean, Charlo, he looks real good. Andrade has looked real good at times, but in terms of what they've done, Saunders has to rate up there. In talking about the styles matchups, I'm looking, we're talking about Andrade. Sorry. We're talking about Andrade. I think Saunders versus Andrade would be a bad fight. I don't think there's a lot of stylistic appeal in that one. Andrade, he's just, I think he was at the fights and he made some video before that, it happened, and, he was calling out the winner of the fight, and that's all good and well. I mean, I like to see guys get in there and try to make their name known and put themselves out there. But you look at what Andrade's done with his career thus far, and, he just hasn't been active. He struggled with Jack Colkay, who's a good fighter, but, certainly nothing special. Andrade at his best has looked pretty damn good. But again, stylistically, you have two southpaws like that, and I just don't. Honestly, it's just not a fight I think me or you guys or a lot of the fans really want to see. I think John was pretty good in throwing Deverenchenko's name out there because he's an aggressor. He's a technical aggressor. I think, again, stylistically that meshes pretty well. I think Jermall Charlo versus Saunders would be pretty good, though I'm not quite sure we get, something like that. I would like to see Daniel Jacobs get the fight because he's the most deserving. Whether or not the fight would be, all that appealing in terms of, what we're seeing, it doesn't really matter to me. Jacobs deserves, the best of the best. He's earned that. He arguably beat Golovkin, and he's looked damn good, since his loss to Pirog. So, that's what I would like to see. But Saunders, to me, he's got the style to give any of these guys trouble. And one name I would actually throw out there, who I really wouldn't be surprised to get a shot, is Ryota Murata. Yeah. So Murata is under Top Rank's promotional banner, and we all know how close the WBO and Top Rank are. So, Saunders holds a WBO belt. Murata just fought some, bullcrap eliminator versus Endom. It makes too much sense, in my opinion, for Saunders to fight something like that. And I'd actually favor Saunders in that bout.
All right, so let's go ahead. We'll move on to the undercard from tonight's fights, which we had an entertaining scrap between Antoine Douglas and Gary O'Sullivan. That was a fight where I had Douglas winning maybe 3 of the first 4 rounds, and then O'Sullivan just kind of took over, outworked him. And the thing that got me tonight is I'm never a big fan of Roy Jones Jr. on the fights, but I think he picked up early on what was wrong with Douglas, and he was spot on it tonight, John.
Yeah, I thought O'Sullivan fought well, and he's a pretty good fighter. Don't want to take anything away from him here, but this is what's good about, we do these podcasts every week, so we're on the record beforehand on what our opinions are. And, I had expressed concerns this week earlier and in the past that Antoine Douglas, I love what the heart he fought with against Kurt Seedy, but that he took too much punishment in that fight. I believe he ended up in the hospital after the fight. 3 knockouts against very, very soft, under-the-radar opposition since. And then, HBO obviously felt that they could take a shot at bringing him back here against a little higher level of opposition, and did not go well. And, of course, we don't have any specific medical evidence, but just all the experience watching boxing, and we've all seen this type of thing. I know Antoine Douglas is only 25 years old, and it's kind of sad because he fought with a lot of heart in that Kurt Seedy fight. It was a great fight. I thought it was the best fight that year. But he took a tremendous amount of punishment, and I just don't think he's the same. I'd seen him fight a lot before that. He was on Showbox a lot. I was very interested in his career and followed him because he was really one of my favorite prospects. He had a draw with Mikel Soro, who's a world-class fighter, earlier in his career. I mean, that's how now that we know Soro was a lot better than we realized, we also knew how good Douglas was then. And, Kurt Seedy was a legit top 10 middleweight after the Douglas fight. Knocked out Tommy Langford in England. So we know how tough he is. And I just think Douglas took too much punishment, and I just don't think he has it anymore. And I think we saw that tonight. I don't want to take anything away from O'Sullivan because I always give a fighter like O'Sullivan, who does what he has to do in that situation. In other words, he stopped him. He did what he needs to do in that situation. He got the job done, so he deserves all the props for that. But with that understood, I wish the best for Antoine Douglas. I've always liked him as a fighter, but you could see that tonight, and I suspected that after the Kurt Seedy fight that he was going to have a tough time coming back if he was ever able to come back. And I think this is just evidence that, unfortunately, even though he's only 25, he's not going to be able to come back. And if he continues to fight, unfortunately, it's probably not going to go well for him.
Yeah, Jeremiah, Gary O'Sullivan is a solid fighter, but I hope they don't subject us to him against Billy Joe Saunders again.
Yeah, no, that's not going to happen. I mean, O'Sullivan's a good fighter. But he's just not a world-class fighter. I mean, we've seen that. I mean, he was outclassed by, a significantly younger Billy Joe Saunders. Saunders has clearly progressed since then, this being the pinnacle. And O'Sullivan is still pretty much the same guy. O'Sullivan loses, he's lost every time he stepped up to the best of the best. But even with Antoine Douglas taking a beating, I figured he could eke this one out. In terms of natural ability, he seemed like he was better than O'Sullivan. But, O'Sullivan's just a guy who keeps plugging away, and Douglas is a guy who just likes to fight too much. I mean, him languishing on the ropes as much as he did was a terrible decision. I mean, O'Sullivan has good power. He's not a one-punch knockout artist, but if he hits you cleanly, he hurts you. And Douglas kept languishing on the ropes. He kept letting Sullivan bang him to the body, and you could just see slowly he was just sapping the energy away from Douglas and start popping him with a nice combination to finish the fight at the end. O'Sullivan, again, he's never going to be a world player, but if you throw him in fights like this, and there are plenty of them out there, good on him. I mean, he could make good money just doing this for the rest of his career. I mean, these are fights that are winnable for him, and he's got a good British following. Well, he's Irish, sorry. But he's got a good following, and again, he can collect decent paydays doing this, until he decides to hang up the gloves.
All right, and then we go to HBO's, I don't know, Cletus Selden.
Yeah.
I don't know how he got on HBO, and I know me and you've talked for a while about how we didn't think he was very good. And tonight, Ulysse Jr. pretty much proved that, completely dominated him. And the thing to me is this, the boxer had no clue, and from listening to his cornermen, they had no clue of what he could do either, Jeremiah.
No, they didn't. I mean, the strategy, I don't know what they thought they were going to do. They thought he was just going to work behind that, that left elbow and just bomb Ulysse out. I don't know. I mean, for me, and it's funny because I said right before the fight, I didn't make some big blatant prediction like, Ulysse is going to school him. But so we saw Selden on HBO, 4 weeks back, so this turnaround time is pretty impressive. I mean, it's not often that we see, well, not only that, Ulysse had fought, 6 weeks ago? So, the turnaround time for both of these guys is impressive. I mean, it's not often that you see a guy, fight on HBO or fight on fairly big-time TV in Canada and come right back like this. But as soon as the decision was announced that Selden would be fighting Ulysse, I wrote an article on Ulysse, I think last month. He was the prospect that I highlighted, and he ended up losing a split decision that most people thought that he had won. And so, when I thought about the styles meshing, that's when I felt the urge to post, like, I don't know if this is a good career choice for Selden. And oh my God, did it turn out to be a terrible career choice for Selden? I mean, he was outboxed and made to look like a fool just about every step of the way. I mean, I think he landed about 2 clean, hard punches in the entire fight. Ulysse he just didn't seem bothered by anything that Selden was doing. I mean, Selden's aggression. Oh God! And you're listening to the HBO commentary, and they were saying stupid crap 4 weeks ago when he was on. They're talking about how his style's like Marciano, and they were talking about Gene Fulmer and this and that. And I mean, I'm sitting here, putting a gun to my head, like, what are you guys talking about? I mean, the guy fought in a similar style, right? But the things that he was doing, he clearly didn't understand the nuance guys like, Fulmer and Marciano, et cetera, did. His jab was virtually non-existent. He would throw some pity-pat jabs out there and try to line you up with a big right hand. It just, for Ulysse, who has real quick feet, quick hands, good pop, it just was no match for him. And it was just a poor decision. Honestly, they should have thrown him in a fight like we saw on Fox Sports 1 this week. They should have thrown him in with a guy like John Molina, MolinaRedcat, guys who are bangers, guys who can make fun fights, but guys who are limited, guys who are hittable. This was just I don't know what his promotional team was doing, but it was a terrible choice. But you know what? Ulysse looked fantastic. I mean, he looked real good, and he looks like he competed at a world level. I mean, the Claggett fight he lost, again, most people thought he won that fight. My guess is that he'll probably rematch him and win more decisively, but kudos to Ulysse. The only knock against him, I would say, is he should have went for the knockout. He had him, he dropped him in the first 3 rounds. He should have tried to finish him in the 4th and 5th.
Yeah, I don't think he would have much trouble finishing him if he wanted, John, and that's the only drawback I see from Ulysse's performance tonight.
I concur with both of you guys on that. Ulysse looked good. My only criticism of him was in the second half of the fight when he'd already been dominating. He was obviously the superior fighter and had been hurting Selden anytime he opened up with his right hand, that he continued to just move away in the later rounds instead of just picking up the pace a little bit and stopping him. That's a little bit of a strike against him there because he was so dominant in the fight. And I, again, agree. Selden just showed that he couldn't do anything with him. Really, there was, to some degree, it was ironic what we saw tonight because we had Selden was a minus 190 favorite over Ulysse, and Lemieux and Saunders were even money. And, of course, Lemieux and Saunders was on a higher level and much more significant, but the fights were very similar in that sense. One thing you saw, with Selden and Lemieux is that, when they were getting hit, they weren't even able to, like Jeremiah talked about the nuances, they weren't even capable of counterpunching at all. No. I mean, in other words, there wasn't even a time where they would get touched and then they could hit back. That's what was like amazing about both of those fights. The level of the mismatch in skill was that, of course, Selden was worse than Lemieux, even, of course. Lemieux has beaten some people, but, Selden couldn't even land a counterpunch over the entire 10 rounds. I did kind of like Selden's two-handed power when I saw him even before they had his HBO debut. I had seen him a couple of other times, but yeah, he just turned out that he had nothing else there. As Jeremiah said, there was just nothing else to his game. Corner didn't know what to tell him, and maybe in their defense, they knew how bad of a mismatch it was, and they didn't know what else to tell the guy. I mean, they just saw what was going on like we did, and what do you tell him? But I really liked, when Ulysse was dropping him, showing that skill. I would have liked to seen a stoppage there from him, but everything else I saw out of him, I liked skill-wise. He showed some pop, and he obviously showed good boxing skill, and they talked about he's got some amateur pedigree, and he showed that. And, of course, Selden doesn't have any amateur pedigree, and he's a 31-year-old, 140-plus pound guy, which is, for that weight class, even getting to more of an advanced age, and he doesn't have the amateur pedigree, so he's in a tough spot to begin with. Like Jeremiah said, they probably, it reminds you a little bit, again, on a lower level, it reminds you of, when Joe Smith took that Sullivan-Barrera fight, and we were all saying, this just isn't a good career move for him or a good style matchup, and we proved to be right, even though he dropped Barrera. Of course, Joe Smith was competitive at least, and he was able to drop Barrera, and Selden wasn't competitive at all. But why I compare those two is, you wonder if the money that HBO can give these guys is just a little bit more than they can get anywhere else, and boxing's not as popular as it was in the old days. And unless you're, a Pacquiao or a Mayweather, we look at the money those kind of guys are getting, but the other guys aren't getting this kind of money. You look at the purses, and I think maybe in the case of a guy like Joe Smith or Cletus Selden, the money is just more than they're going to get otherwise, and they just figure I've got to take this fight. That's all I can think of. Otherwise, yeah, it's just simply a poor career move, and it still may be because maybe you can make that money up by winning some other fights. But that's just kind of my guess is that when HBO comes in and says they want you on there, that the money that gets involved is more than they're going to make anywhere else.
All right, real quick, we're going to go ahead, John or Jeremiah.
Yeah, I was just going to say real quick, with Joe Smith and Cletus Selden, I understand why people are quick to attach themselves to these guys, because in the case of Selden, okay, so he's Jewish. I mean, it's rare that you see a Jewish fighter nowadays. He's kind of American in the sense that he wears these, American flag bandanas, and he's got a style that's at least somewhat reminiscent of fighters past. I understand, I get why, some of the HBO guys are like, oh, I want this guy to be good. I want to lend him some praise, but this is a cautionary tale to all of us to just pump the brakes. Wait till the proof is in the pudding.
Yeah, and that will bring us to the world heavyweight PED champion, Alexander Povetkin. Boring 12-round unanimous decision over Christian Hammer. Jeremiah, I know you saw this fight. I watched part of it today, and it was basically Hammer trying to survive. And to me, Povetkin looks like he's well on his way down the other side of the hill.
Yeah, I remember telling you, you don't need to finish it. I mean, it was pretty repetitive through the 12 rounds. I mean, it was Povetkin coming forward, throwing the occasional combo, Christian Hammer doing little offensively. He was doing a lot of grabbing. I think he was penalized for it in the 8th round, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, it was just a clear-cut win for Alexander Povetkin. He just, to me, he looks slower. He looks old. I mean, and we got to understand that, a lot of these guys, Luis Ortiz, for instance, he hasn't looked the same since his win over Brian Jennings. Povetkin hasn't looked the same. It seems just about that Wilder and Joshua are really the only 2 top 5 guys who look, well, I guess Joseph Parker, you could say, is also in his prime, but it's just those 3. It's Wilder, Joshua, and Parker, and then everybody else is either old or, hasn't really impressed me all that much. But yeah, that's what it looked like to me. I mean, Povetkin just looks a little older. He looks a little slower. Doesn't look as powerful. But from what I understand, what I was reading in the news is that Povetkin is next up for Anthony Joshua at some point in the future. That's about all I got. I mean, I like Povetkin. John and I disagree a little bit on this point, but Povetkin to me has always been a very good fighter. He's actually a guy I think who could be a contender in any era. I mean, he's a guy who had a real strong amateur pedigree. I mean, he won a gold medal. He's a guy who understands the value of feinting. He's one of the very few heavyweights I've seen in the last, 20 years or so who goes to the body consistently. His power is pretty good. His speed is good. His combination is good. He's a real effective fighter. Not only that, he's tough. I mean, he's not a guy who, you would consider chinny. It's just he's a real good fighter. But his career has been kind of stagnant. I mean, he's beaten a ton of top 10 guys. I mean, if you look at his career, he's got a solid resume. I mean, you could argue that his resume is probably better than just about anybody's in the sport right now, in the heavyweight division. Not recently, of course, but, overall, I mean, he's been a top 10 guy for, God, I don't know what, a decade now.
Yeah, and
so he's a good fighter. I mean, and he's going to give – I still think he's going to give the top dogs a tough fight, but he's not the same fighter he used to be. And, he just looks downhill from here.
Well, I think Povetkin of 5 years ago would beat them both right now. But I don't think that we've seen the best of Wilder or Joshua yet, hopefully. Any comments on Povetkin, John?
Well, the Povetkin of 5 years ago was probably doing, a good cycle of PEDs with the help of Russian medical
and so are the 2 guys that we're talking about that are supposed to be heavyweight champions, probably.
Well, I mean, I don't think there's been any allegations against Wilder for PEDs. Joshua certainly hasn't been caught for any. Some people have alleged because of his physique that he's a PED suspect.
Well, I mean, so's Wilder then because of his physique, right?
Wilder's a 6'7", 220-pound guy. That would not normally be a steroid user profile, but
it wouldn't.
Again,
it is football-wise. It is. I mean, you got all kind of guys that are 6'5", 220 pounds using steroids.
He would be much more bulked up at that height normally.
Well,
if he was,
it's according how you're lifting while you take them, John.
Well, I don't think that Mike, you and the other guys are always talking about his skinny legs. So he must be not getting good PEDs if he's got the skinny legs problem. So you can't say for sure, but I don't think that anybody's ever mentioned Wilder as a PED suspect.
Well, sorry, I just interrupted.
The other guys keep testing positive that are supposed to fight him. He's not testing positive.
Yeah, and that's to Wilder's credit. I mean, he is passing the VADA tests, unlike the other guys. But I mean, like with most of these guys, I mean, drug testing is so poor in boxing. I mean, really, why wouldn't a lot of these guys be doing it? I mean, a lot of these athletes have, they have character flaws. I mean, they don't have good educations. That's why a lot of them get into boxing. And you don't. Again, we've talked about this on the show many times. I mean, doing them and not doing them can be the difference of $1 million or more dollars. I mean, the difference of collecting continual paydays or not. I mean, you look at Anthony Joshua. I don't know what sort of testing he's doing, but I mean, the guy's put on almost 20 pounds of lean muscle in 2-3 years. I mean, that's not typically the sign of natural bulk. And then you have. And again, I mean, did Vladimir Klitschko ever take any VADA testing? I mean, I don't know what testing he ever did. Vitaly Klitschko admitted to taking steroids. I mean, he was kicked off the Olympic team for doing steroids. He admitted to doing steroids when he was a kickboxer for a leg injury. I mean, Erkin Tepper has been caught. He's from Germany. Luis Ortiz has been caught. He's from Cuba. Tony Thompson has been caught. He's from the United States. I mean, my guess is that they're probably protecting the very best guys. Not making these guys do. To see Vladimir Klitschko that good at 41, 42 years old, it always raises alarms. But the problem is. Just like many people who run in the Olympics, like Marion Jones, for instance, when the whole Balco scandal, there was people shed light on that. If any of you have seen Bigger, what's the documentary?
Bigger, Stronger.
Yeah, I mean, if you've seen that, you know that many of the American Olympians were using, but it was covered up. I mean, this is something that most people are doing. I mean, you look at. The top, the sprinting and, just about everybody in the top 20 has been caught except Usain Bolt. And I think you got to be pushing it to think that he's not doing it. I mean, I don't want to get off topic too much, but you look at Usain Bolt in 2006, 2007, he's running a 10.07, and then a year later he's running 9.7 or 9.69, something like that.
Yeah, which is impossible to do without help. You can't do that naturally.
No, and actually Memo Heredia, the well-known drug cheat and the guy who got caught in the Balco scandal, he did an interview with a German newspaper called Der Spiegel before the Olympics, and he straight up said Usain Bolt you cannot improve that much without the use of drugs. And not only that, Jamaican drug testing is a complete joke. But this, in boxing, so in the Olympics, at least they try to test you. I mean, it's easy to get away with, but in boxing, a lot of times it's being handled by, local state athletic commissions, even places like USADA who are doing the UFC's drug testing. They throw samples away. They covered up, Eric Morales' tests, and all sorts of stuff. I mean, I think you've got to be. I think we just want to put the blinders on when it comes to who's using and who's not using in boxing. Because look at Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury is now he has a 2-year ban pending, right? So the British Board of Boxing Control said, okay, you can resume your boxing career. because they could not prove that Tyson Fury and Huey Fury used nanodrone willingly. And so Tyson and Huey Fury blamed their positive test, and they were both popped, I think, about a year apart, on tainted beef. How often have we heard that? But who's even talking about the test? It's just one of those things. Boxing fans like to put on the blinders and just ignore it and say, hey, just let's see the fights.
Yeah, and my point is this. All right, I've coached football at a fairly high level. Almost everybody is doing this, John. And the thing is this: I just get sick and tired of hearing of it because I know 90% of these guys are using this stuff. They just are.
But here,
go ahead.
But here's my point, though, Mike. This is my point. You can't either you're in favor of PED use, which is a position that could be taken, where you say in boxing and all other sports, we're going to treat PED like we treat weight training, and you're just going to be able to go do it. Whoever gets the best doctor, we'll just consider that part of your training and part of how much you want to win. Or we're going to be against it. And if we're going to be against it, when guys like Povetkin and Ortiz get busted multiple times, they've got to be ostracized.
But it's not fair. They're going to bust Povetkin. They're not going to bust Joshua and Wilder because that's a huge fight that a bunch of Americans can make money off of. Tony Thompson will get busted.
But then you're just in favor of just let it go. Just let it go and be in favor of
Well, can you tell me why? Hold on a second. Tell me why you shouldn't be able to use performance-enhancing drugs.
No, I'm saying that's a position. But then people who are okay with Povetkin and Ortiz and say everybody does it, then you got to take that position. That is a perfectly
that's the position I'm taking. And my problem is this. I can
accept that.
If you look at PEDs, all right, the American Medical Association has studied this extensively. There's no adverse effects. The adverse effects from steroid use come from when you don't cycle off after 4 months, where you just keep doing it and it'll shut down parts of your body. Now, to me, a cortisone shot, that's a performance-enhancing drugs. And they do that in all these sports. I mean, to me, I don't care. And like you said, you got to get the best doctors to win then. Well, in football, you got to get the best weightlifting coach. In boxing, you got to get the best trainer. And my problem is this, John, in the end, they're not holding everybody to the same standard. I'll guarantee you that. And no, that doesn't mean I think Wilder's doing or has ever done them. But maybe he's tried it one time. Maybe Joshua's done it. His physique tells me there's a decent chance he's done it. And you get all these people running around, and they don't mind athletes using opioids so they can play. But steroids, seriously, John, you look up the AMA, and if you use it properly, there's nothing bad about it. And, you can take whey protein. You can say that's a performance enhancer. You've got all kinds of vitamins and minerals that are a performance enhancer. So unless guys are dying from it, and then people always throw at me Lyle Alzado. Lyle Alzado died of a freaking brain tumor. It had nothing to do with steroids. So when you look at that, I think
I think that what you just stated is a perfectly acceptable intellectual position to take, and I actually respect that. I didn't know you were taking that position. I respect that. I've thought about that position, and I've decided that I don't take that position, that, if we have PED testing, it may not be perfect, but it's getting better, and the guys that do get caught got to pay the price. But I do think that it's acceptable to take the position that you've taken. My problem with what I hear out there from fans and commentators is this middle position where people are saying, I'm supposedly against PEDs, but then, it's okay for Povetkin, or it's okay for this baseball player, or it's okay for Ortiz, and they're claiming they're against PEDs. In other words, you got to take a position. If you're against PEDs, then these guys are going to have to take penalties that get caught, and they're going to have to be significant to be a deterrent. because I agree, there's so much money at stake, then everybody's going to do them anyway. Or you take the position that you took, which I agree with you. I mean, you can certainly make an intellectual argument. What's the difference with taking a cortisone shot, an opioid, to play a football game where you're going to damage your body worse, and taking PEDs? I mean, it's hard to make a decision.
Yeah, and really, in the end, John, if there's a crowd of 100,000 people at Wembley in London, and a couple days before Joshua and Wilder, fight, if one or both of them test positive, do you think anybody's ever going to say anything about it?
Well, we don't know. That's what we don't know. We're in the world of.
See, I think we do, just because of stuff like Eric Morales. I mean, they'll cover this up. I mean, Floyd Mayweather paid more than anybody to cover his steroid use up. There, I said that.
Well, yeah, I mean, you had, so again, I want to see the hard evidence, but you had Floyd Mayweather paying USADA $100,000 for tests that cost $30,000.
That right there, like, Jeremiah,
like Peter
to me, is pretty hard evidence. I mean, he's paying three times what everybody else pays.
Well, and not only that, I mean, he's injecting an IV in his arm in his home. When the people from USADA are coming in, not only that, he flushed, he puts like 500 milliliters of saline in his system, which is completely illegal. So they allow you to I think inject your. I think you're allowed to do about 50 milliliters for every 2 to 4 hours. I'd have to look it up. I'm not exactly sure. And he's doing 500. I mean, if that doesn't say, I'm flushing my system, I don't know. You know what I mean? But you also have, you have, Manny Pacquiao hanging out with Alex Ariza, and then, Floyd Mayweather gets him on his team, and then you have Memo Heredia, a well-known drug cheat even to this day. I mean, Vanes Martirosyan blew Heredia up on Twitter, I think it was 2 years ago. And Vanes Martirosyan said the first time that I met Memo Heredia, he asked to put me on a PED plan for $15,000. I mean, it's nuts. Okay, and you have a guy like Memo Heredia hanging out in the Mayweather gym. Okay, Mickey Bay gets popped for having a testosterone level, a TE level of 33/1. Do you know what an average man what an average white guy has, or an average black guy? It's like 1.4. Oh, it's 1.4, and Mickey Bay has 33. Okay, and Ishii Smith is messing with this guy. There's where there's smoke, a lot of times there's fire. Again, I'd like of course, like anybody, especially I'll want to see the hard evidence there, but I do think that a guy like Anthony Joshua, I wouldn't be surprised if they covered it up. I mean, look at the potential racist remarks, that we saw, right? Okay, he's messaging Eddie Chambers. Yeah, okay, you haven't heard crap about it, right?
No.
And I've also heard other things, like he's on one of his social media portals talking about how he's listening to Louis Farrakhan, and stuff like that. They're the powers that be will protect a guy. Of course they will. I mean, it's not beyond them. I mean, we've seen stuff like this time and time again. So if Anthony Joshua is using, I'd like to see them use VADA testing and help narrow that down and help give us some results. The problem with VADA is, even though they do a better job than everybody else, you as a fighter and as a promoter can set the time to when they start testing. So like with Mayweather and Pacquiao, for instance, I think they only tested for 4 weeks leading up to the fight, right? So even if you're cycling on PEDs, you can do it months beforehand, and then you're only getting tested 4 weeks up into the fight. That's not that big of a deal, right? So and we see this time and time again. The best of the best, people are covering for them. It's just unfortunate.
Yeah, and see, to me, John, my biggest problem with it is this. If you could guarantee it was fair for everybody, I would have no problem with saying no PEDs. My problem is this. I think the guys with the money, the bigger names, number one, as you said, have the better doctors so they know when to cycle off, but they'll also be protected. And I think that's anything in sports now. I guarantee you there's been NFL guys. Rob Gronkowski's got pimples all over his back. But,
Well, that is one of the big jokes out there is how no NFL guys basically are getting busted for PED. Well,
see, I can tell you this in the NFL, and I had some experience with this from a guy that got signed from one of my football teams to an NFL team who came directly right back to me because he couldn't pass a drug test. I had one of my other players that played in the NFL that got drafted. There was a kid that played at Ohio State that got drafted. And when he got there, they had told him before that when training camp starts in 5 weeks, you're going to be one of the people tested for marijuana. I mean, they would give these guys the list of who was going to be tested. And he showed up, tested positive. They cut him immediately. But these guys know going in when the test is going to be, whether it's for weed or PEDs. So basically, the only people to get caught are the idiots.
It'd be good. Ideally, I would also just like to see, stringent testing standards that, are consistent. And that's the problem with boxing, that, it's worldwide. So you've got different countries, you've got different states within countries. It makes it even more difficult. But again, if we're going to have it, I just don't like to make excuses for the people that do get busted.
And I'm not making excuses. I just don't care anymore, John. I mean, I don't.
Yeah, and I understand your position.
I think it's a bunch of BS. I mean, it's just I think that as everything else in this world seems to be, it's slanted towards the powerful people who don't get hurt, but the guys that aren't the powerful people, they'll take them down. And I just want to see everybody. I just go fight. I mean, because from what I know in combat sports, there's a huge majority of people that are doing these anyways. And I think it would be real hard to get them out.
Yeah, well, yeah, and look at the UFC when they implemented USADA. I mean, for years, people getting popped, it didn't happen very often. And then as soon as they have some standardized testing and, everybody's getting it, all of a sudden Anderson Silva, arguably the greatest MMA fighter ever, he's doing them. John Jones is doing them. I mean, do we really think that boxers aren't doing them? Do we really think the best of the best in boxing is not doing it? I mean, to me, I just think it's naive. I mean, even in boxing, even the fact that you have to be a dummy to get caught in boxing, Roy Jones Jr. has been caught. Okay, former pound-for-pound number one guy. Shane Mosley, we know, was using. Former pound-for-pound number one guy. James Toney has been caught. Never a pound-for-pound number one guy, but certainly in the top 5 at one point. So, I mean, are we really going to assume that the best of the best is not doing them? I just don't buy it. I mean, again, I think we're all just burying our heads in the sand and just assuming. I mean, again, you look at a guy like Juan Manuel Marquez, and all of a sudden he's like 40 years old, and he's packing on muscle, and he's lean, and he's got pimples on his back, and even a guy like Victor Conte is like, you really need to test this guy, right? And then he goes and knocks out Manny Pacquiao. It's obviously happening. I mean, Steve Cunningham has talked about this too, where he's like, I've fought guys who I know are using, and I know it's a big issue in boxing, but nobody really wants to address it. So, again, and not only that, you got to get in the nuance. I mean, what really is a performance-enhancing drug?
Yeah. And sometimes they stretch that a little bit also. But all right, let's go to the Friday night PBC fights, because I know John's excited to talk about John Molina and Ivan Redcat. Correct, John?
Yeah, that's the kind of fight we need to be on basic cable. Certainly a fight of the year candidate, an explosive brawl. Certainly is either guy really going anywhere for top contention? That's not what the fight was about, but the fight, both guys showed tremendous heart, a lot of entertainment value. obviously one of the fights of the year. Maybe it'll end up being the fight of the year, and that's what's good when you have something like PBC does when it's on FS1, because that's the type of fight that if you got your casual friend to watch or somebody you want to introduce to boxing and they saw that, they'd say, yeah, I might want to tune into this again. So that's where a fight like that needs to be, right on accessible cable TV where a lot of people can see it.
All right, Jeremiah?
Yeah, I mean, it was a fun fight. I actually thought Redcats was going to win that fight. I thought Molina had slipped enough for Redcats to take it, but, like Molina always does, he finds a way against guys who are kind of crude like him. And I was actually surprised. I mean, because Redcats I had some hope for when he was coming up because he had a solid amateur background, but, he's just kind of devolved into a slugger. And, I mean, you put him in fights like this, more power to him. It's a good way to supplement the cards. I mean, and I enjoyed the fight quite a bit, and it was just exciting. I mean, I enjoyed it. Most people seem to enjoy it, and good on Molina. I'm just hoping he doesn't get any shots at anybody anytime soon. He just keep him in that lane. That's where we need him.
All right, and then in the main event, we had Jesse Vargas beats Aaron Herrera, unanimous decision in 10 rounds, and of course Friday, me and Jeremiah got to interview Mike McCallum, where we found out that he was now the trainer for Jesse Vargas. And, of course, John found out when the fight came on, so we don't always know everything, John, do we?
No, I got to admit, that surprised me when I saw Mike McCallum in there. That surprised me. And although Mike McCallum was a great fighter and had great nuance to his game and a lot of skills, a very intelligent fighter with that understood, and I'm sure he would be the type of guy that would make a good trainer. I just saw the same old Jesse Vargas in there Friday night. I've just got to say that doesn't punch enough for a guy that's a boxer. Not a lot of power, and it's going to be. He's now in with PBC where you've got all these welterweights, and it's going to be. He's going to find himself in some tough fights, that's for sure. And I don't know what he's going to be able to do to compete with some of those guys. Herrera, the guy he fought, he didn't really look like he came in to win. Not that he would have beaten Vargas anyway, but there was 3 great fights on that card, and then the Vargas Herrera, and Herrera didn't look like he really was coming in to try to do all he could to take a W out of that one.
Yeah, Jeremiah, I actually thought Jesse looked a little bit better, but not that much.
Well, I mean, if there's one thing we can say about improvement, it's that his jab looked better. I mean, if any part of his game looked better, and you saw the Mike McCallum influence, I think it was the jab. I mean, because he looked calm, and he was flicking the jab out there. I mean, it was well timed. That's what I liked. I mean, I think that was a big reason why Herrera couldn't get any offense going because, Vargas just stayed patient and worked behind it. I mean, unfortunately, it kind of caused the fight to be, a little dull, but he got a victory and he'll move on to bigger and better things. I don't think there's any doubt that, Vargas will probably get a bigger name. I don't think he's going to be an opponent for Keith Thurman or, Errol Spence anytime soon, but he'll get somebody. He'll get one of those guys that PBC has, and he'll make a decent fight of it. But he's just a little too slow. He doesn't punch hard enough. I just can't ever see him hanging with the top guys.
Yeah, I almost forgot also, John, to bring up that Jamal James won by a 3rd-round knockout over Diego Chavez, and looked impressive doing it to me.
Oh, that was a great performance by James. That's where you get excited when a guy really steps up like that and surprises you. James has some talent. He's tall. He has good boxing skills. He's fought with a lot of heart in his fights. He throws quite a few punches, but as we said in our preview, the one flaw in his game was that he didn't have punching power. Well, he had punching power Friday night, and he knocked out a guy that had been in the legit top 10 in Chavez, and it was an impressive KO. Now, at his height and with the skills he has, if that is not an aberration, if that power is going to stay, or at least that's going to sometimes, then Jamal James becomes a factor. You got a loaded welterweight division, but still, he could be a guy that if he can continue with that increased power, he could be a factor. And I just want to add one thing on Jesse Vargas. Actually, the post-fight interview, I did like that he was a little bit critical of himself that he didn't get the stoppage and push for the stoppage. And I actually kind of like to see that from a guy. Of course, boxing is a tough sport, but that he was able to give himself a little self-criticism. He wasn't even rationalizing all of his own performance. And I think that kind of bodes well for him, that he knows what he needs to work on there if he keeps working with McCallum. But Jamal James, at 6'2", and if he's going to be punching with power, he's going to be a tough matchup for people.
Jeremiah, Jamal James.
Agreed. That's all I'm going to say. Agreed.
Good, because we're at an hour and I'm ready to go to bed.
Yeah, it's getting a little late for me too. I got to be up in the morning.
All right, guys.
I guess we're not going to talk about Wally Omatoso then.
No, because Jeremiah wants to go to bed. But I did like that fight.
I'm ready for bed. But it was a good fight.
Yes, it was.
It was. Omatoso is one of those guys who will give you a tough go.
We'll do a show Thursday, and we'll talk about Wally Omatoso. Or I'll see if I can get him on. What the hell? We got George Foreman.
How can he deny us?
Yeah. And I want to remind everybody, Legends of Boxing show, 6 Eastern tomorrow, live on thegruelingtruth.net. We'll have former champion Juan Laporte. And then, of course, Monday at noon, we will have James Lights Out Tony. So for Jeremiah Preisser, John Einreinhofer, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.